pleasure to invite Gilbert Gan, Ahmad Musa, Lu Tat King, Raj Sagagurajaj, Wang Ki Hui, and Yung Hon Chong of Zaid Ibrahim, which is part of the ZICO Law Group, to lead us through reimagining the new corporate ESG integration for value creation. And of course, as everybody seems to know, environment, social and corporate governance is what ESG actually stands for. Now, Zaid Ibrahim Co, the founding firm of the ZICO Law Network, is a full-service firm and one of the country's most highly regarded. With more than 170 lawyers, it has developed a reputation for devising innovative and practical solutions customized to their clients' needs. The firm's impressive track record features engagements by local and multinational corporations on unique and complex commercial transactions, mergers and acquisition exercises, fundraising, and large infrastructure projects in Asia and emerging markets as well as strategic law firm initiatives. And the moderator of this session, well known to the in-house community of Malaysia and also beyond, Gilbert Gan. Gilbert is the managing partner of Zaid Ibrahim and heads the firm's corporate finance and securities practices group as well. He's recognized as one of Malaysia's top 100 lawyers by Asia Business Law, and much higher than one of the top 100, and is regarded by the International Financial Law Review, Chambers Partners, and Asia Law Profiles as a leading lawyer. And over to you, Gilbert. Thank you very much indeed, Zaid Ibrahim, for the support as well.
Thank you, Patrick. It's always a pleasure to join your well-organized and well-received conferences. We gladly participate, not only those in Malaysia, but also in Singapore and Hong Kong as well. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my sincere pleasure to have you join us. Like Patrick says, I'm very, very happy to see that the number of participants has gone up right now to 180. Hopefully it's for this session and nothing else. Now, ESG is, together with the digital economy, has been our firms and our networks push in recent years. We see the trends, we see the needs from our clients to get proper advice in this regard. This session that we have today is one of a series that will come, and we hope to achieve with this session, a sharing in depth and more particularly comprehensive sharing with you what ESG means, especially to you out there, legal counsels. So we're familiar with the environmental aspects of it, and we will have our speakers speak about it, but there are also the social elements, the governance elements. So to deliver, hopefully a meaningful explanation of what these are, why it's important for us to ensure sustainable and value creation in the long term for our businesses. Let me just briefly introduce my panelists. I've got Ms. Wang Ki Hui. She heads our project practice, very well versed in this. She helped to draft, for example, Malaysia's Renewable Energy Act. So she's done the studies. She is really keyed in, particularly in Malaysia, and now increasingly in the regional, environmental aspects of projects. I also have with us Yung Hon Chong. He heads our Human Capital Services practice. He's been very busy lately during this pandemic, and also on aspects of modern slavery, as we call it nowadays. And he has some very insightful examples to share with you. I also have Ahmad, who heads one of our corporate practices. He has been also busy on issues of governance, which in my view really is the tie-up or the tie-in for all aspects of environmental, social, as well as governance issues that we face nowadays. Raj heads our compliance, data protection, as well as technology practice. He will hopefully be able to provide you with an interesting aspect of what is not just old, but new, as you see trends in all of these. And finally, Tat King, who heads one of our finance practice groups, giving you an insight of how money flows have now become more attractive to investors if you have an ESG angle to it. So let's start off first with the very first question, right? What does it matter to me to have ESG integrated into my business, which is probably a question that legal counsels may feel probably has nothing to do with me, right? And particularly in this time and space where we have the pandemic raging on. So for that, let me maybe ask this question to Kiwi to address. Yeah, Kiwi?
Sorry, I have to unmute.
Okay.
But sorry. A very good afternoon to everyone, and thank you very much for taking the time to join us in this session. As what Gilbert has said, this year admittedly is a very challenging year for everyone. Priority for businesses around the world is actually to stay afloat, right? Reach new customers and help their communities. So you may well ask, why ESG integration into business is important at this time. I think the reason is that we need to be conscious of the fact that the current way of doing business does not guarantee future success anymore, as the future will no longer be the same as how we see it in the past. There is already quite clearly a paradigm shift in the current consumers' and investors' attitude towards the need to care more about environment, about climate change, doing social good, and strengthening corporate governance. The pandemic, in fact, has accelerated the need to have ESG integration into businesses for sustainability. So ESG initiatives are no longer considered philanthropic contribution or CSR, but strategic corporate investments expected to drive long-term shareholder value due to the potential reductions in the cost of capital achievable by taking an ESG focus and potentially creating new business opportunities in addition to mitigating business risk and managing crisis. I will share later in 2 case studies how this is so. As GC, I think effectively communicating that sustainability is the key to business continuity is important. And the best way to get the management of the company on board on this is to demonstrate the benefits of integrating ESG into the business. So I will cover 2 areas in helping to make a case for ESG integration into business. Firstly, on the increasing importance of ESG factors on investment decisions, and secondly, how ESG initiatives can help improve operational efficiency and cost savings within the company itself. If I can have the first slide, slide 4. If you can see from the screen, let me share with you the findings from the survey conducted by EY on 298 institutional investors globally. From the findings of the survey, it's quite clear that ESG factors are increasingly important to investors in their assessment of the overall performance of the companies when making investment decisions. You can see that 91% of them place emphasis on non-financial performance, and 75% of them actually evaluates how the companies are planning on climate change. Right? But you then say, how do I then convince my management to spend money on implementing ESG integration when we are in the midst of such bad economic crisis? It's actually a mistaken belief that costs outweigh the benefits of ESG integration. Let me show you some concrete evidence which clearly demonstrated why it makes absolute commercial sense to have ESG integration in your business, and that ESG credentials do help companies, right? The first case study we can see from the screen is on GE's Reimagining 2005, where they have developed a business strategy that designs products that meets their customers' demand for more energy efficient, less emissive products that will help the customers better manage their environmental impact from their operations. At the same time, GE has also put in place a program that improve their own operations. From the numbers below, you can see that they have invested $16 billion US from 2005 to 2015, but the revenue and the returns that they have is actually 14-folds, where they earn 230 billion in return. Over and above that, they have also helped, reducing the environmental impact. As you can see, that there's a reduction of 42% in terms of water consumption and 31% on energy reduction. So This has evidence that financial and environmental performance can be integrated to accelerate profitable growth of the company. And the next study is actually on Toshiba, right? So again, from the screen, you could see that Toshiba has rolled out products which have been designed to have minimum environmental impact during their entire life cycle. And they've spent 220 million on the R&D, and their sales have rose by 342% in just 3 years to $15.8 billion. So there are already observable benefits gained by corporates that have been proactive in incorporating ESG considerations into their business operations. Next, I would like to also highlight the fact on how, by improving operational efficiency through better management of natural resources like water and energy, as well as minimizing waste internally within the company, can also help with achieving significant cost reductions. Because of time constraint, I'm afraid I only have time to perhaps identify one particular example how operational efficiency and substantive cost savings can be achieved by implementing energy efficiency initiatives. Increasingly, there are more companies jumping into the bandwagon of retrofitting. They are building a facility to increase energy efficiency, which can translate into substantial cost savings. So again, from the screen, you can see that Sunway Pyramid Mall has actually retrofitted, and by virtue of that, they have saved 3 million in total in terms of annual energy costs. And our government offices under Grade A has also successfully reduced the electricity consumption by 39.4%, right? So as you can see, entities which have participated in the retrofit program has also achieved substantial operational cost savings. Very simply, EE, energy efficiency, means using less energy to achieve the same results, or to achieve better results using the same amount of energy. So in the current economic climate, you would say that naturally companies will try to reduce costs, delay unnecessary capital expenditure while looking ways of how best to reduce operating expenses. So we thought that EE efforts is actually the lowest hanging fruits, which can help companies to achieve cost savings and at the same time reduce emissions and help the environment. This is what GCs can help to propose to companies. We have helped companies to adopt energy performance contracting model in implementing their retrofit program, where no upfront capex is required, but at the same time company will be able to achieve the goal of cutting operating expenses. So this EPC model is actually a simple arrangement where a third-party energy service company, which is also called the Energy Service Company, ESCO, can come up with the initial investment costs for implementing the EE and conservation measures at your facility, your building, your factory, and the ESCO will recoup its costs through the sharing of energy savings, which the client enjoys from reduced utility bills. The best part of it is that guaranteed savings, if not achieved, there is no repayment to the ESCO. So the risk is shifted to the ESCO. And the client does not need to come up with the initial capital costs. Malaysians, though we enjoy low energy prices, but this is not going to last forever. We need to manage the eventuality of high electricity costs. Government has gradually reduced its subsidies on natural gas since 2008, where we have our electricity tariff review every 6 months to take into consideration fluctuation of fuel prices. And the discounts given by TMB is also not going to be indefinite. So EE initiative is a good measure for companies to embark on to help companies to be able to cope with future increase in electricity costs, and at the same time helping to mitigate climate change. So as you can see, business sustainability is not just moral imperative, but also good business practice. Going green is a competitive differentiator now, but in the near future, it will be the key to staying in business. So I hope with that, I've managed to provide some concrete examples as to how ESG integration actually benefits the bottom line and can help you to convince your management to pursue ESG integration for value creation in the company.
Thanks, Kiwi. Maybe for those who can relate because of the actions of their businesses, I think this will be very useful. Perhaps a bit of a deep dive already for some. But to me, at the end of the day, very insightful. Certainly, environment is a very big part of this. I will come back to you, Kiwi, on because you've talked about the positive side of integrating ESG. I'll come back to you on the consequences of not doing so. But again, to give our kind audience a full flavor of the ESG, let me just quickly turn to the social aspects. What are we really talking about here? And for this, maybe I can call upon, Yong to talk a little bit about this. It's got quite a bit of media traction here in Malaysia, particularly in certain sectors. And also, I understand there have been some developments in our law also in this space. So, Yong, maybe you can share us your thoughts on the social elements of ESG.
Thank you, Gilbert. I hope everyone can hear me clearly. If you can't, just
we're good.
Yeah, drop me a note or something. Now, let's move on to the first slide. Basically, I think what's thematic here is going through a lot of people's mind in this year, especially, is whether we can put a stop to things, especially when it's new initiatives, whether we can talk about waiting and talking about implementing ESG and things like that after the pandemic tapers off, or after the MCO, as the case is in Malaysia. My answer to that is no, we can't wait, right? Because employment issues, especially the social issues, they don't stop during a pandemic. In fact, many a time they come to the forefront of things rather than anything else. Let me give you a very broad example here in two categories of what we mean by social. Well, at least what social means to me in this context. On one aspect, on one end of the spectrum would be your corporate social responsibility endeavors. I think that in an MCO period, that comes even more to the forefront because there are those who are less fortunate who probably need even more help than any other times, right? Or the organizations that organize social good to help people would need more assistance in those times. Now, closer to home as an employer would be how you treat your employees, basically. And when we talk about treatment of employees, we are looking at the full spectrum here. What were the main issues? Gilbert said I was very busy during the MCO periods and so on. True. It was a lot of answering of questions as to what do we do with our employees, apart from essential services, a lot of people had to stop work and so on, or, if you're a factory not in essential services, you just could not continue with your operations. It was not a simple thing of asking your factory workers to take home a little basket of products and go make the products at home. It wasn't a work from home kind of thing, right? So a lot of employers were looking at how do I cut costs, for example? How do I deal with this situation? It's unprecedented. This has never happened before. What do we do? Now, if we recall the height of the MCO starting in March, going on for the next 3 months, Ministry of Human Resources and other relevant ministries issued a lot of guidelines, issued a lot of orders, issued a lot of statements, right? None of them actually told you exactly what you could do with your employees. They actually talked about, yeah, maybe you can put them on annual leave, or maybe you could put them on, or you can ask them to take leave and so on. None of them actually came right out and say that you can do this, you can't do this, right? The statements were more along the lines of, you can put them on annual leave, but you must consult with them first, right? Which I think is fair. But ultimately, the end game here is that you couldn't force employees to do anything, right? Forced labor is a taboo word. Forced leave during the MCO was a taboo word. So what we're talking about is fair treatment of employees throughout, right? Now, the whole idea of ESG is about raising the bar. We are not talking about continuing in concepts that we are used to. Perhaps before I move on to the next slide, let's wrap this one up here, right? So my point in this slide is that no, we should not be waiting until after the MCO before we do things. These employment issues are always there, they're always in the forefront. And perhaps to give it a little more color, can we move on to the next slide? Let's go straight into perhaps some examples that we can look at. Again, this also illustrates the whole idea of whether we can wait before we introduce things. Let's look at the two boxes at the bottom of the screen, right? The experience of glove manufacturers, that was quite highly publicized here. Now, when I talked about raising the bar in the social aspects of ESG, we're not talking about saying, I'm sure most of the audience, you are familiar with Malaysian laws, right? We're not talking about compliance with the Employment Act. We're not talking about complying with the minimum standards of laws in Malaysia. We are talking about raising the bar. We are talking about compliance with perhaps standards in foreign jurisdictions, or perhaps even internal requirements of clients set in foreign jurisdictions. In short, you want to do business with the foreign jurisdiction, you have to raise the bar there. Let's talk about glove manufacturers. Were they actually doing a lot of things wrong? I would say the opinion is divided, right? Let's take one example, holding of passports for your foreign workers. I read a survey that was done quite a number of years ago, well, 2014 in fact, issued by the Malaysian Employers Federation. They did a survey amongst about 100 companies, 76 of which were engaging foreign workers. More than 2/3 of those employers held their foreign workers' passports. If we look at the Immigration Act, there is a provision to say that you should not be holding on to someone else's passport. But let's look at it objectively. It was a prevalent practice by a lot of employers who helped to hold their employees' passports. Now, from that number who held passports, about 2/3 of them actually, in the survey, confirmed that the passports were held for safekeeping, but were returned to the employees as and when they wanted to use it. Why do employers hold on to the passports? It was for purposes of renewing work permits. It was for safekeeping. Because if an employee goes out there, loses the passport, it will be a whole bureaucratic or administrative endeavor to get new passports for them and so on, right? So it's more for safekeeping. Yes, there were those who held the passports so as to try to keep the employees to ransom, so to speak, right? Now, in this context, the other point that came up with the glove manufacturers was the payment of recruitment fees at the home countries by the employees so that they could secure jobs here. Now, bear in mind that a lot of these payments were made in their home countries before the employees even came into Malaysia, right? So it was people basically going to a recruitment agency and saying, let me pay you some money, or I'm willing to pay some money, can you get me a job in Malaysia, and things like that. Now, let's look at Malaysian laws. Were they wrong in recruiting people like that? Did they have any obligations? Did the glove manufacturers have any obligations to pay those recruitment agencies in the foreign countries? The answer is no. There's no law to require that. But because in the US, this sort of method of getting employees to pay certain recruitment fees, and in some cases, employers would deduct wages so as to offset whatever they had paid in advance and things like that. This then translated into a situation of debt bondage. You are bonding your employees by way of debt, right? And this was unacceptable in the US. What happened? One of the manufacturers ended up bearing a bill of about 100 over million in remediating payments to these employees for whatever they had paid. So at the end of the day, it became a very expensive exercise. I think just before I end off this segment, one other thing that came about in the course of my work was on the right-hand side of the screen, that box at the bottom. Now, this was a manufacturer in Malaysia. They were manufacturing certain products for a US customer, right? US customer sends their people to do an audit, a general audit, routine audit of things in the factory. During the audit, one of the employees raised an allegation of sexual harassment, but in raising it also kind of dismissed it as a joke to say that, oh, so-and-so does this, but everybody laughs it off as a joke. What happened? That particular employer had their contract for the US company suspended for 6 months, right? No business for you for 6 months because of this, right? So this is another aspect of the social issues that arise in ESG.
Right.
Your own internal policies. And I think those are the low-hanging fruits.
Yeah.
Put in place your policies.
Right. Right. Thanks, Yong. I just wanted to comment here. I think the US CBP situation was and is an eye-opener for many manufacturers, not the glove manufacturer. And I know that for the glove manufacturing sector, they have been discussing this, as an association and so on and so forth. And what our leading glove manufacturers in Malaysia have done, certainly, as you said, Yong, has been full compliance with Malaysian laws, but as you've also pointed out, maybe it's not enough now, and we would have thought maybe. Now it's certainly, right. And I guess, and to be clear, so all the remediation that was done was voluntary, right? It's voluntary. Absolutely. In the sense that you want to do business with these countries, which are important markets for you. Well, these are the standards that you have to adhere to, and in those countries, even themselves, they are elevating. All right, we've been through, I guess, a very we've been through the U.S. presidential elections, and before that, and leading up to that, we had the BLM movement, and I guess even in developed countries, and this is my point, they are also having to learn that maybe even for them, current standards are not enough in meeting the social in ESG. So let me move on to another important aspect, right? The G in ESG. This for me as a corporate lawyer, of course I'm familiar with, and so on and so forth. But as a lawyer, I guess for an employment lawyer like Yong, all I do is look at Malaysian laws, see we're compliance with this. Well, that's it. This is what we do. Now, however, in my own experience, and you can see that in many of, I would have to say, those who are more well-funded, more doing well, and so on, of our clients are going into ESG, and trying to get some of that limelight to put out a better perception of themselves. Now, so on governance itself, I do see that movement, and I do see us getting requests for advice to move towards that. We'll have Ahmad talk about this, but maybe my personal experience not too long ago was this. We are on the panels of many banks, including international banks. And not too long ago, I had a instruction from one of them that that we may be together with everyone else on their permanent panel, as they call it, be subject to audit, and specifically audit of our timekeeping, right? Under the context of their and this was, I believe, a result of the BLM movement, in order to be able to be held accountable under the context of diversity, right? So what they wanted to be able to do, and were warning us that they would want to, they may come and look at our timekeeping when we do work for them, and to see that the timekeepers come from a diverse group of lawyers, paralegals, staff, and so on, in terms of ethnicity, probably, religion, and so maybe nationality. You know, we're in 10 countries, so and so on and so forth. So for us, it's not a problem. You know, ASEAN is quite diverse, and most of my senior partners are all ladies. You know, if there was any issue with that, as well as the other touch points for diversity. But this is a concrete example of how that has come to creep very, very concretely, not just into corporations, but who they deal with as well. They expect others to meet the standards. So Ahmad, maybe you want to give some color to our colleagues in Malaysia and friends in Malaysia about what governance is in ESG, and the full, maybe some sense of the breadth of it, and in some aspects of where it's heading. Ahmad?
Thank you very much, Gilbert. I'll be happy to do that. First, ladies and gentlemen, we need to understand what is governance or corporate governance. As the old Malay adage says, tak kenal maka tak cinta, things that you don't know you can't possibly love, and things that you can't possibly love, you will not accept or apply. So how is corporate governance defined? Right? So now let's look at this slide. The Malaysian Code of Corporate Governance 2017 defines corporate governance as the process and structure used to direct and manage the business and affairs of the company towards promoting business prosperity and corporate accountability, with the ultimate objective of realizing long-term shareholder value while taking into account the interests of other stakeholders. So there are at least 4 big concepts that you have in the corporate governance. The first one is on business prosperity. Number 2 is corporate accountability. 3 is long-term shareholder value, and lastly, interest of other stakeholders. The last 2 concepts, which are on long-term shareholder value and interest of other stakeholders, are often misunderstood and ignored. So firstly, it's about long-term shareholder value, not short-term gain that may not be sustainable in the long run, in the long term. And secondly, you must take into account the other stakeholders' interests, not just the company's shareholders' interests, who are inherently biased towards their own selfish interests. Now, business prosperity is not limited to having good revenue and good profit. It must also include having good relationship with your customers, with your suppliers, with your creditors, employees, regulators, surrounding community, and other stakeholders, including the environment, but basically the entire ecosystem. In other words, be a corporate good citizen. As the saying goes, no man is an island, and by extension, no company is an island. So it does not matter how big the island is or how big the company is, it still has to depend on others to survive and to prosper. What I can observe is that overemphasis on increasing shareholders' value would distort the proper understanding of good corporate governance. This may require a change of mindset. So now let's move on to the next slide. For illustration, ladies and gentlemen, for example, in a pharmaceutical business, the corporate vision or mindset should, instead of how I can make money as much as possible by selling drugs, which is the bedrock of capitalism, it should be how can I use science to save people's lives, which is the new norm, especially during this COVID-19 era. Now, if you can move on to the next slide. If you have this blue-colored mindset, which is the capitalistic mentality, the people's greed to make as much money as possible will influence decision-making process, which may potentially lead to ignoring safety issues, accelerated production for market without sufficient testing that could eventually endanger human lives. Now, on the other hand, if you have this rather colorful mindset, even the corporate vision is involving saving people's life, which has the element of altruistic behavior, safety issues would obviously be the primary and most important criterion to be considered. Profit would come naturally afterwards. There have been a number of empirical studies to support this conclusion. And there is a perfect logic behind this. When you take care of your customers will take care of you. They become loyal. And when you take care of your employees will take care of you. They become more hardworking, more diligent, more productive. And when you don't take care of your environment, the environment strikes back. Or other people like NGOs will strike back on behalf of the environment. Yeah? When you don't take care of your people, your environment, your surrounding community, you will face problems, definitely sooner or later. Say your business is processing rare earth materials somewhere in Pahang. Do you think that you can get along with your business if you don't address the concern of your surrounding community? Yeah, probably not. Now let's move on to the next slide. If I could give you one metaphor of improper or insufficient corporate governance, I would say that it is like a virus. It is like COVID-19. Some people may take a stance that improper or insufficient corporate governance is harmless, and it is just like a common flu, and you'll probably most recover from it, but it eats you from the inside. Sometimes you can't see the danger of it. If you can't see it, you can't see it with the naked eyes because it may be probably embedded in practices of certain managers, which are often done surreptitiously. And it is also infectious. It may potentially infect and affect the entire value chain involving contracts with the suppliers, licensing with the regulators, especially when corruption is involved. And mostly it is asymptomatic. Sometimes there are no apparent signs so that the board may ignore the risk altogether. Small-scale corruptions may not be detectable unless you have good Samaritans somewhere to blow the whistle so that the relevant authorities and enforcement officers will spring into action. But it is still wrong. It is a pandemic, right? The problem is not peculiar in Malaysia, although here you have one MBB case, but it is a global phenomenon. Over 2 decades ago, we have Enron, we have worldwide. So it has affected the entire world, right? So ladies and gentlemen, the danger of improper and insufficient corporate governance is real. So precaution must be in place. Good corporate governance is the vaccine, so we need to hurry up and get the shot, so to speak. Back to you, Gilbert.
Yeah, you touched on Enron and all that. I know, Tat King, who's our finance guy, he's very passionate about it. We are called the younger partners of the firm, but young as we are, we've been through. Well, we're both about the same age: the Asian financial crisis and of course the GFC. Tat, you had something to share about that?
Yeah, thanks, Gilbert. Good afternoon, everybody out there. This lack of corporate governance and the lack of alignment of governance with the environment as a whole in 12 years ago led to the global financial crisis of 2008. Now, I wouldn't want to rehash what caused the global financial crisis of 2008. But suffice to say, the 4 pillars that Ahmad said just now, business prosperity, corporate accountability, long-term shareholder value, and interest of stakeholders were all conveniently forgotten at every level of many financial institutions. Right from the product itself, if you recall, there were all these exotic products in leading up to the years of 2008, created by many financial engineers, paid lots of money and lots of bonuses by large banks, largely without oversight, and they were incentivized by the fees and the profits. The boards did not have an oversight, did not know what's going on, but the fees rolled in. And along the way, they say, hey, this is a good thing, right? There was a systemic failure of the entire financial system because of the lack of the ESG principles, as highlighted by Ahmad just now. If you take the global financial crisis, right from mortgage brokers to the banks, investment banks, underwriters, the credit default swap providers, there's a big story in that. Go watch Michael Lewis's movie, The Big Short. The rating agencies, there's another documentary as well, very good on that. And ultimately, the entire financial system suffered, right? And not many who sat through that era, realized how close we were to not having a financial system over one weekend. Right?
Yeah, it's existential, right? Yeah. I hate to be skeptical, but I think we will have another one. But let's see. Sorry, you had anything else to add for this before we move on? Yeah.
Bringing back to our audience this afternoon, the general counsels. So it's not just pieces of paper and resolutions that you're shuffling to the board of directors. There must be a system in place to ensure that the resolutions are properly considered and passed, the risks are carefully weighed, and at the end of the day, you can lose your job. And actually, if you lose your job, like when Bear Stearns collapsed overnight, Lehman Brothers collapsed overnight, you saw all those on CNN, people taking their bags out of the office building overnight. It is a real risk, okay? And let's not just blame the US and the global economy, because in Malaysia we got our own 1MDB as well. Again, I don't have to rehash I don't have to rehash everything, but there was again failure at every level. The M&A was weird, to say the least. Board of directors were bypassed, accountants and auditors' reports, red flags were ignored, and what is the downside? Multi-billion-dollar settlements were paid by Goldman Sachs, as you can see. People were banned from the financial system for life. Banks were compelled by central bankers to, hey, you got to improve your money laundering infrastructure, and you have to commit X million, I think it was quite a large figure, to improve your financial money laundering compliance. So these are very, very real risks for GCs to consider. But I have only to say, after 2008, because of what happened, and because of all the infrastructure that's in place, stuff like money laundering, stuff like risky products have been much, much more difficult to do. And that's probably the good thing. So you have to look at these extra costs with another angle. It is to prevent a much bigger loss.
Yeah. That's great. Now, Tat, I want to jump on to move on a little bit since you are speaking on this. You look at the what governance could cause in terms of even existential question. But then if we on the financing side, ESG now has become a buzzword in ESG financing. You want to share a little bit on that? Yeah.
So fast forward 5-10 years, forward about 5 years after the global financial crisis, the UN realized that we have to put in place certain responsible financing guidelines. We have to ensure that there's enough incentive for large multinational banks to put capital towards correcting the system. Okay, a lot of money was being thrown at dubious ventures, at dubious products, at dangerous dangerous factories, dangerous ventures. So, and same in private equity, they were financing a lot of stuff. So there was a lot of financing. There was a lot of thought that went into. A lot of people got together and came up with the responsible financing principles. And lately, there's something called transition finance. Basically, it bridges the gap between your traditional financing and green financing. You can be a traditional business. Let's say you are the most heavily polluting industry around, coal mine, for example. But if you want to invest in green tools, like for example, carbon scrubbers, or you have a fleet of cars, a car hiring company, and you want to invest in green cars, battery operated cars, you can transition from a heavy carbon industry to a greener industry, and transition finance is one of those tools that is available out there. And how to tap onto it? You have to ensure that your governance and your policies should be aligned to those ESG financing in order to tap onto those markets. Because you can't just ask the money to say, okay, I've got a great plan to greenify my factory. Okay, give me 10 million, I'll pay you back 3% per annum, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't work that way. In green financing, the use of funds is audited. It goes into certain financing products, certain types of financing, and like 6 months, 12 months down the line, is audited by some people that give something called second opinions. They give them, it's like almost like a credit rating for how green your thing is, your venture is. And if you're running a factory that is heavily polluting and you invest in, say, a carbon scrubber, if you have measurable decrease in carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere, you will get a rebate if your targets are met. Okay, some people will use a rebate and fund their CSR initiatives. The rebate can be in form of lower interest. It can be in form of cash incentive, right. But there are various structures.
Okay, let me just cover off first and have Raj, my dear colleague, leads our quite a few specialty areas to talk about, expand a little bit on governance, traditional, corruption, AMLA, and all PDPA and all that, as well as maybe share with us on how the ESG is now being bonded to, so to speak, with technology. Raj, maybe you'll share with us, maybe just a couple of minutes on this, because I realize that we are moving quite advanced in our time.
Thanks for bringing me in, Gilbert. So I mean, I'm just follow on from what Ahmad was saying. If you want GCs out there, if you want to look at which is the most important factor for ESG, both of us will say governance. Why? Because it's our practice area and we need the fees for next year. So start with governance first. Okay, so now looking at governance, one big component of governance is compliance with law. And compliance with law is just not a tick box exercise. If you treat it as a tick box exercise, then you're going to face serious repercussions. It is taking in compliance into the DNA of the company in all decision-making process and operations. Wait, if you can just go to slide 24, 25. Okay, so if you don't play by the rules, you get red carded. I was actually trying to find a Manchester United photo of a red card. I couldn't. That's fine. Next, you go to the next slide. So these are a summary of bad things that can happen to you in the company if you don't comply with law. Fines, imprisonment, definitely. I mean, we all know that. But you also look at government intervention to remedy market failures. Now, these things would really put a big damper into the company's ambitions if government comes in strongly to regulate the market. I would show you a few examples of what bad things can happen when you don't comply with the law. Next slide, please. Okay, so we all know Section 17A of the MACC Act. We all know that you have to implement procedures. But the important point is that you can't just have a tick box. You can't have like a smoke screen compliance measure. And Rolls-Royce and Siemens felt the brunt of this. Why? Because they had the most beautiful policies in place. But what they didn't do actually was behind the scenes to ensure that the company was having a culture of compliance. Behind the scenes, there was actually a culture of corruption going on. And despite all these beautiful policies that they implemented, the companies were still fine. Why? Because they were bribing government officials, senior management was involved. There was no clear guide in terms of it to employees to understand these policies. So they call it smokescreen. Siemens was another example. And next slide, please. From a competition perspective, I wanted to bring this example because competition regulators around the world have the power to remedy markets which are distorted. They can come in, implement, introduce laws, measures to level the playing field. And if you're a company that is dominant or you've got very strong market share and distort the market, then government can intervene, as you can see with Google and the air cargo case, where not alone severe fines were imposed, but government came in to remedy the market. Next, I wanted to talk very quickly on data protection and cybersecurity. Why? Because it just doesn't matter what you do, but you also have to take protective measures to protect the company from what third-party attacks. Now, from the context of cybersecurity, if you are a data-intensive company and you don't have enough security to protect customer data, then if anybody hacks into the company, you can get fined. Not fair, but it is the responsible thing to do. You have to protect customer data. So this is why I started off by saying that you can't just take compliance as a tick box exercise. You've got to look at it holistically. You've got to fit it into the DNA of the company. one more message to GCs. You will see a lot of legislation coming on from now where the responsibility is placed on management and also the board to ensure that there's a culture of compliance. Section 17A is one of it. But a lot of people also forget that you have these corporate liability provisions in the Consumer Protection Act, the Personal Data Protection Act, where not if an employee or somebody associated with the company carries out something that's wrong or against the law, the company, the board of directors, and senior management can be liable for those acts.
Right. Thanks, Raj. Sorry to have rushed you on that. And I congratulate you on covering all these areas so quickly. Now, obviously this first main section of what we discussed is meant to give you, our audience, a good sense of the scope and breadth of ESG, right? I guess you may be wondering what do we do next, right? How do we get this going? Now, as I said, this is going to be a series of talks, but maybe just a little bit of flavor of it in some respects. And I'll ask Kiwi first, because I guess environmental is important thing. And it's, of course, I don't know about you, but my water was cut the last 2 days. So yeah, this is foremost on my mind now. Kiwi, you wanna talk a little bit about this? How and where do I start?
Sorry, I kept forgetting about my yeah.
Yeah, please carry on.
Okay, sorry, thanks, Gilbert. I think very quickly, maybe, following up from what all my colleagues have said, we all are very clear on the ESG concepts, and going forward, what do we do from here, right? So there must be an ESG roadmap towards resiliency of the company. We all know now climate change and sustainability issues are real, right? Companies need to set strategy. And there is a need to think about incorporating sustainable growth programs into the business strategy. I think I have very simply put in 4 steps here where company can start. I think first on is to have a holistic view of the company, its current business model. There is a need to identify possible risks, vulnerabilities of the company's areas which can be improved. So you need to understand, the different risks from the ESG perspectives of the company, have a process to identify and analyze what type of events which could disrupt your business and how the company plans to manage and adapt, right? So you need to consider procurement process, like Raj says, whether check and balance are in place. It's not just beautiful SOPs, but having strong culture and values on law compliance, integrity, in addition to promotes employee diversity, as what you have quite rightly pointed out, Gilbert. I mean, our clients also demand that going forward. In addition to that, like I've mentioned, there are also opportunities to also innovate your products to be more environmental friendly, and also to be able to meet new requirements of new demands of customers who are increasingly more environmental conscious. In the case of GE and Toshiba, where they have seen a huge increase in their customer base and exponential rate in terms of revenue return, right? So after you have understanding the risks and possible opportunities that you could actually tap on, then there's a need to sit down and formulate the strategy and build a business ecosystem. So you need to consider what are the core drivers that you think you can, provide both value and sustainability to the company, to the stakeholders, and how you can increase your competitiveness. So you can gather a set of a team who focus on championing this ESG initiative, so that you can have a focused group of people who can support your targets and maintain communication and collaboration efforts towards meeting those goals, right? Step 3 is, to be able to collect all those data from the initiatives that you have implemented and analyze this, right? So that you can then clearly demonstrate the efforts that you have made, right? And also to make sure that, with the disclosure, then you could also better inform your stakeholders as to how you deliver value to the shareholders and stakeholders. And this disclosure can come in the form of corporate annual sustainability reports, standardized reporting frameworks, that has been set up in the Global Reporting Initiative. You can actually have your internal benchmarking as well, and also have that highlighted in your management reports, and also reporting indexes and registry like FTSE for good index series indexes, which are adopted also by Bursa, right? So over and above that, I think what is important that you will continue to evaluate and improve on your ESG initiatives, so as to be able to continue to assess and improve over time sustainability program that is not just a commitment to to adhere to the ESG standards, but also to drive innovation and growth in your company. So remember, resilient companies that move early, not only they are ahead of downturns, but also ahead of peers and better able to navigate crisis and risks, as we have highlighted earlier in the sessions by my other colleagues.
Yeah, long-term sustainability, right? I've got some questions. Before that, let me just come back to Ahmad. Ahmad, I'm aware that the accounting firms, IFRS, are looking at ways by which, tools to help management integrate, right, ESG into the business. I guess for many businesses, the better you are, the more sharp you are, the more compliant you generally want to be, and therefore that also implies that if it's not in the rules, if it's not in your accounting standards and so on, you probably don't have time, because you need to be lean and mean and so on and so forth. Ahmad, you want to give us, in 1 minute, some sense of that? What is the super layer now that we may see on top of just rules and regulations that we all know and are familiar with?
Yeah, thank you very much, Gilbert, for that question. If you can just scroll to the next slide.
Yeah.
Next one. Yeah. So basically, in my mind, there are three pillars of implementation of proper corporate governance. The first one is compliance, something that my learned brother Raj has greatly covered. Disclosure is also another aspect of implementation of proper governance. So this is the question that somewhat related to the question that Gilbert just asked just now. If you can scroll down further on the disclosure aspect. Yes, so basically in terms of disclosure, there are two aspects insofar as ESG disclosure is concerned. The first one is corporate governance report. So for corporate governance report, it's quite straightforward, because it's basically a summary of measures that you have taken, whether or not you have complied with all the principles in the Malaysian Code of Corporate Governance in 2017. Basically, it's about the effectiveness of the board, risk, effectiveness of the audit and risk management, and the engagement with the stakeholders. But the not so clear part is about the sustainability report. This has been required by the listing requirement for the past 5 to 7 years. But the ambiguity is that to what extent we should be reporting, right? What would be the standards that should be applied? At the very least, if you are a listed company, you should be referring back to the sustainability reporting guide. The latest edition is in 2018. The first one was in 2015. So that provides the minimum standards that all listed companies must comply. But above and on top of that, there are various standards, mechanism, benchmarks that you have at the international level that have been published by the various NGOs that you have there. If you look at the slides, you have one that is propounded by the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, SASB. You have one that's established by the Carbon Disclosure Project, and so on and so forth. So basically, if you're an investor, right, so what standard, how do you measure a company that has complied with the minimum or the internationally recognized sustainability standards, right? So that's a very big question, man. I think at the moment, the four big accounting firms have tried to somewhat come together and come up with a standardized standard that can be adopted by the big corporations insofar as reporting sustainability aspects is concerned. So I think we are moving towards a standard sustainability reporting mechanism and measures. So I think we are not so far off in terms of having a
right. Thanks. Right, thanks so much. So hopefully with this, this is the part that is I think awareness may not be so well distributed as compared with environment, for example, so that GCs out there who are listening in, maybe there won't be that awkward pause anymore. If management asks you, how do I go about with this ESG thing? I'll just ask one question because I think we may have 1 minute. Now, Raj, just very quickly, do you see increased enforcement by regulators to drive the message that businesses must operate responsibly and ethically? Or maybe you have already answered that through your presentation.
Yes, but no, I'll have the 5 minutes of fame again.
No, you only have 1 minute.
1 minute, okay.
1 minute, yeah.
Yes, I think the answer to that is yes. Now, if you recall, in June, when the pandemic was quite strong, there was calls for the government to postpone the implementation of Section 17A, corporate liability, under the MACC Act. Why? Because they needed more time to comply. They needed to put money in when cost was becoming an issue. What the government responded to say, no, we want businesses to continue operating ethically, and we're going to enforce. There was also calls for the government to suspend the Competition Act so that competitors can get together to actually try to fight the pandemic. But even then, the government said, no, you still have to compete. Why? Because if you don't compete, consumers will suffer. And despite whatever the pandemic is hitting you with, you still must operate ethically. So I think with these two examples, the answer is yes, you will see stronger enforcement.
Yeah, I totally agree. Actually, one of the silver lining of perhaps Malaysian politics now is governance, right? It's called the question. Anyway, we're out of time. I just want to go to our last slide. Okay. Now, as I mentioned earlier, hopefully, your precious hour has been spent usefully in trying to understand from a GC, from a lawyer's perspective, what ESG means to all of us. And from there, hopefully, maybe some will resonate. I would actually probably pay attention to those parts which we don't seem to be able to relate to, because that's the thing. That's the breadth and scope of ESG. It touches on areas that we may not be aware of. Is part of this whole trend, right? That I guess we need to get on board on. So we will be following through on the E, on the S, and the G in separate sessions, which will reach out to all of you. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining us for this session. And I hand over now to our organizers, IHC. Patrick?
Thank you very much, Gilbert, and a great session from all of you. Actually, could I? Yes, so that's wonderful, because we can ask Peter to join us. I know Peter's on a tight time frame, so if you can join us, Peter, and we will do a screen grab. Before we go, I've got 1 minute actually, well, 30 seconds, I guess, but I really enjoyed everybody's presentations today. I thought they're fantastic. One of the points that I'm actually very intrigued about was about one MDB and also Wirecard, actually. And I know it's very easy to be wise in retrospective, in looking backwards, but both of them were, clearly very poor business models, which with a little bit of intelligence and, true business acumen could very quickly be seen to be what they were. So hopefully just, good old common sense will also prevail, as well as all the financial, shenanigans that can happen. A really great session. Thank you to Herbert Smith-Freehills and also to Zaid Ibrahim. And we'll do the time-honored wave as we say goodbye. And thank you all very much also for keeping to time. Thank you. Bye-bye.